I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a master's student at Rutgers University. Ooh, I feel like I don't have an area of expertise yet. I feel like I'm not far enough along to be an expert in anything. I'm currently studying queer theory. I'm in the women, gender, and sexuality studies track. I'm very interested in the notion of debility as opposed to disability and how populations are targeted for harm, and that's never recognized as such. Um, I'm interested in the notion of queer abuse and violence and how interpersonal violence mirrors state violence and how the two contribute to each other. So I've known I was queer since I was like, I don't know, 17, probably earlier than that. And I grew up in a very small conservative town. So for me, finding a community was really important. But then it relatively quickly became obvious to me that there is an awful lot of very normalized harm within queer communities, um, and an often a lot of normalized abuse within queer communities. So, particularly between queer women, I wanted to study the messy entanglements between queer women and how complicated that can be. I'm very much still in academics. I went to Michigan State University where I majored in English and history and minored in LGBT studies. After that, I graduated in 2020, so that was fun. The market was pretty rough. I eventually found a job working with a political consulting company where I was helping to circulate petitions for ballot initiatives in Michigan. That was pretty exhausting, fulfilling, but exhausting. I wanted to go back to school because I had this very lofty idea that I was going to get a PhD. Maybe I will when I'm like 35, freshly divorced, looking for a new start. Um, but I was really interested in learning more about queer theory. And quite honestly, I just wanted to get out of the job market for a while because it was pretty exhausting. So I thought I'll just go back to school. That's where I am now. And after this, I think I would be interested in doing more advocacy work, but things aren't quite up in the air currently. So, yeah. So while I was at Michigan State, I was working with an organization called Beyond the Bomb. And part of my job responsibilities, I guess, were writing these blog posts that the organization would publish. So I was due to write another blog post, and I knew I wanted it to be about like the sexualization of nuclear weapons, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to go about it. So I read excerpts from Dr. Carol Cohen's Sex and Death in the Rational World of Defense Intellectuals. I thought it was fascinating. And because so much of national security, and particularly nuclear bomb or nuclear weapons discourse, is so absurd, the whole concept of deterrence theory I find absurd. The fact that the United States has like 7,000 nuclear weapons, absurd. So I thought I could try to write something that fed into and acknowledged that absurdity. I wanted to see how many double entendres I could find that connected nuclear weapons discourse with this very sexualized discourse. So I wrote it thinking that it would be too explicitly sexual for anyone to publish. It was just going to be like a fun little thing that I'd send to my boss and be like, haha, isn't this goofy? I'll write something serious next time. But then my boss suggested that it become an actual video. And so people were put onto the project to make it into an actual video, which was pretty exceptional. I didn't expect it to go anywhere. I'm very interested in the notion of harm and also the way women as like actual people, but also as symbols are used to justify harm. Like with colonization and projects of empire being framed both as a way of gaining access to colonized women's bodies, but also like quote unquote protecting colonized women from colonized men. And that's another absurd discourse. So connecting the image of woman to these large, I guess, projects of harm and how harm is not recognized as such, or who, in the eyes of the state, is capable of being harmed or who is not capable of being harmed, who is capable of causing harm. What harm do we recognize as harm? What violence do we recognize as violence? I'm very interested in expanding that idea and looking at how sex and gender are weaponized in ways that perpetuate harm. I have this perception, at least, I'm not sure how accurate it is, that people don't think that much about nuclear weapons or think about nuclear weapons as a human rights issue, or national security is framed so much as this area of intense expertise and also cynicism, where if you're not in a government position, if you're not creating these bombs, you don't have the right to comment on these bombs or how your government is using nuclear weapons or how your government is utilizing their militaries. What harm is being done in your name that you decide I can't comment on, I can't critique. And I think those discourses are set up so that certain voices are framed as ridiculous. Anytime you bring up like, hey, nuclear weapons are actually quite harmful environmentally for like people, we should never use nuclear weapons. There's no reason for us to use nuclear weapons, to invest so much money in nuclear weapons when, at least in America, it's ridiculous the amount of money that people spend on education, on healthcare. And the fact that we are putting billions of dollars into these nuclear weapons projects, these nuclear weapons that we don't even want to see used, and that this whole discourse is, oh, we won't use them unless we need to. But what's a reasonable time to use a nuclear weapon? So I guess what I'd want people to know is that your opinion matters, even if you're not in a nuclear weapons field. And just because you don't have this expertise about how nuclear weapons work, what are the inner workings of all these different governments and what tensions are going on geopolitically, you can still talk to your representatives or organize within your own community around nuclear weapons and how they should not be used. And yeah, I guess there aren't any ridiculous or frivolous voices in the nuclear weapons space. There are, but they're not like regular people's voices. They're the people saying, we should invest billions of dollars in nuclear weapons. This makes a lot of sense. The rise of fascism globally, or just alt-right discourses globally, seeing so much fascist or like very, very right discourse, and seeing very, very right figures being elected into office within the United States specifically, in like a very post-Trump era, seeing how truth doesn't seem to matter or doesn't seem to have a universal understanding in a sense. In terms of like fake news and what is considered fake news, and people in social media being so drawn into these echo chambers, and facts don't mean anything necessarily. And also, I guess, at least American news media presenting two sides to a story as if they're equal. Like, for instance, police brutality, and then with this notion of security, it's like, oh, yes, I mean, should our police be able to kill people or just enact lethal force whenever they want with no consequences? And we're like, well, maybe they should, and just as though those are equal concerns. Yeah, I guess the justification of harm that is happening and the way harm isn't recognized as such, and concerns about harm being dismissed as, well, frivolous or ridiculous or, I guess, idealistic.